Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt from Divination Counseling Service, here presenting the Midpoints. I did a mini-series, 3 little videos back in 2018, 2019. They're on the site. And I've decided to redo them. First of all, adding in some visuals. And secondly, putting the whole thing together and creating just one video out of it. So, we're going to be looking at the math for the midpoints, and we're going to use Martha's book to look at the personal points that are really important if you're doing natal and counseling work. So before I begin, first of all, I apologize. I'm not in my office again because of road construction. It seems to be just ongoing and endless. And the other thing I want to do is thank all of my subscribers. I want to thank you for watching this video. So please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you all for helping this channel grow. And the more subscribers and the more likes, the more we can grow. So thank you so much for allowing me into your life. So we're going to be talking about our midpoints, starting with the math. And in order to do that, we're going to talk about the personal points in a chart. So the personal points, just so that you know, midheaven and the ascendant. And that's based on time as well. So the ascendant being the horizon and the midheaven being the further top point in the chart. Then we also look, of course, at the sun and the moon, because they are also very personal points. And then we bring in the nodes and the Aries point. And the Aries point represents the outer world, but it's also our personal interaction in that outer world that we're going to be looking at when you look at midpoints. Same thing with nodes. Nodes represent our connections in life, our timing. That is also how we interact. It's how, so whenever you're looking at a personal midpoint, it's what we bring to the table, so to speak. So though they may represent our connections, it's our connections in business, midheaven, our connections in the home, the moon. So, or domestic, you know, people that we might share recipes with, for example. So the midpoints become very important to further delineating particularly natal charts. Now, midpoints, which is like a technique in and of itself, is also the beginning of working with what Uranians call formulas. And we're learning this very basic midpoint technique today, but applying these numbers to planets and points is something that you would do in order to create formulas. And the formulas are further ways to delineate a chart. So I'll do that kind of video further down the road. But for now, we're going to stick with this 101 midpoint math. And I believe that once you have this under your belt, the next section, the Uranian formulas, will be a piece of cake. Okay, so let's look at my first bit, which is the math. We're going to look at the math. Basically, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking the sun and the moon. We're going to look at sun and moon. And by the way, the sun and the moon midpoint, think about what this is. The sun is a lot about expectations, the ego, if you will. It's the I am. And the moon is the emotional makeup, the vulnerability, the intuitive sensibilities. And if you put them together, that's our interactions, our relationships. That is our relationships, the basis of how we build our relationships. So we are looking at, in our first set of figures, this what I consider a very, very important placement when looking at a natal chart, because this is going to talk to you about their relationships, their close connections with others. Okay? So let's look at that math. Now we should be looking at a math sheet right now. I'm having a little bit of technical problems this morning. This is the math sheet. And here we see that, think of the circumference of a circle, 360 degrees, but what's really cool is that astrology does it by making up 30 degrees per sign times 12, which equals 360. So it's really cool that astrology equates to the circumference of a circle. Probably not a coincidence. The way these are broken up, and I'm going to let you see this next, is that you start with Aries and it goes all the way to Pisces, where it brings you back to 0. The first 30 degrees are Aries. At 30, it starts Taurus. At 60, it starts Gemini. At 90, it starts Cancer. So you see how that works. It's really important to know what number starts the next sign, because we're going to be using that for our math. But this is how you find the numbers for everything, and we're using 360 here. Okay? Now, as we go into this, the simple math is to take 2 points, add them together, and then divide them by 2. So using a 4-degree Taurus sun, you come up with a number of 34. Add together the 14-degree Cancer moon, which equates to 104. Now let's see how I got that. Okay, go back up here. And you can see that in this Taurus, the 30 to 59 degrees, it would equate at 4 degrees, 34. You see how I got that? I put 4 degrees on that. By the same token, at 14 degrees of Cancer, I now reach 104. Now, for the purpose of this first example, I'm not using minutes. I will the second time, but I like to stress it that, you know, if you're just playing with something, it's only going to be off by, you know, a degree, if that. But if you're doing it for money, which when I'm doing it for client, I use the minutes. So, you know, the integrity of the work is really important. If we're just playing, for me to show you the technique, because this is a fictitious person, it's not quite as important. We're going to take that number 138. When you put 34 with 104, you come up with 138. And you divide 138 by 2, bringing you to the number of 69. When you go back up here and you look where 69 falls, it's Gemini, 9 degrees. So this person has a 9-degree of Gemini placement, which means that the way they connect with people is probably on a really intellectual, a very charming. They probably have a pretty large associates because of the communication factor. They're good communicators. And that plays into all of this. So even though we're talking about a Taurus with a Cancer moon, the fact is that they have a Gemini midpoint. Okay? Let's do one together. So what I've been using, since I have done this several times today and yesterday, I'm just really trying to get this video done. It's been really tough. Let's work down here further. So I was using 20 degrees, 16 minutes for the Leo moon. Okay, so we're going to do Leo there. All right. Now, I used a Virgo. No, I'm sorry, it was a Libra. I used a 5-degree, and I believe I used 24 minutes, and that would be Libra. And that's the sun, and that's the moon. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to equate these to numbers. So if I go to the Leo and I see 20 degrees, I'm going to put 20 degrees on top of Leo, creating a 140, 16. That's our number. And hopefully you saw how I got that. Then I'm going to go from Leo down to Libra, okay, and 5 degrees 24. So I'm going to 185, 24. Okay, I'm going to add it all up. And we come up with 325.40. Now I'm going to divide that number by 2. It's going to give me, because, and you got to do this, okay, I'm going to do the whole thing. So we got 16. This goes in 2 times, but you got 1 left. So this is what I wanted to show. You're going to carry that 60 minutes over to here for a total of 100 minutes. When you divide that in half, you're going to now have 50. So it comes to 162.50. Okay, I'm going to go back over to my list. And where would 162.50 fall? It falls in Virgo at 12 degrees, 50 minutes. Hopefully everybody got that. So simple. Very, 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 very simple. So you want to keep this around you when you first start. Eventually you just get used to it and you don't need it. But I found it to be extremely helpful when I'm working. Okay? Now, that explains the math. So let's jump to Architects of Time. Ta-da. And let's look at this. By the way, this chapter starts at 105. I want to even use the page number, so I'm going to make sure we get all copyright stuff here. And it's the delineation of personal midpoints, okay? Sometimes this really helps me when I'm working to go back to the book if I get stymied on something and look it up. But I will be honest with you, ultimately astrologers derive their own. So I might look at Martha's and then go, yeah, and then I just have my own way of looking at it. And that's how you're really supposed to do it, okay? But in the very beginning, it's great to have what we call cookbooks. And you can see that she actually goes through each one. I'm going to be in that little window for that, but hopefully you could see that. Okay, so let's talk about all the points that are very, very important when you're doing these midpoints. So we're going to start, let me pull up my pen here. We're going to start with the Aries point, okay? So the Aries point looks like that. So we've got horn rims. I like to, ram horns. So the outer world is important in the personal points only because it's our interaction into the outer world that makes this so. So if I'm working with the midheaven, which will be our next one, okay, which is also outer world stuff, but that's how we want to appear to the outer world. It's our profession, it's our standing, it's what we see as, where we're headed for the future. It's the directions we set up for ourselves. And if you put these two together, you are looking at the interactions of a professional in the outer world, as if I were to go somewhere. When I was a yoga instructor and I would walk into a studio, it would be the midheaven I was presenting to the general public, okay? Or if I go to speak as an astrologer, I am then presenting myself as my midheaven. The Aries point can also be tied up with the Ascendant, which is your coping mechanisms, your defense mechanisms. It's the environment, what you look like, the environment you live in. So when you're interacting in the Aries point with the Ascendant, that would be like walking into the supermarket, and the people interacting with you are doing it based on what you look like, or how you're presenting yourself in that situation, which is the environment is presenting itself. Example, somebody's going to be treating a 4'11" person very different than they treat a 6'8" person. So that's the environment, the 4'11", the 6'8". They represent the environment. And the way that is presented in the Aries point is what is the midpoint of the Ascendant and the Aries point. We then move to the Sun. And the Aries point to the Sun, I like to think of as the ego interaction into the outer world. It's also how we interact with particularly men, not men of our acquaintance, but in men in general, okay? It's also expectations of I'm this person or this ego, I am, and how that is interacting with that outer world, okay? The Moon is the emotional sensitivity, the vulnerability, And it's our interaction with women that would be the Aries point to the moon. So let me just write that down so we know where I am. Okay, oh, that wasn't very good. So the Aries point, so we're here. Oops. The Aries point, it's funny how I work. Here we go. So the Aries point to the moon represents the female interaction, but also domestically, okay? So again, you know, I think of the supermarket as an ascendant going in, but it's also the moon, okay? Because the food, you're buying food, it's domestic. We do it for our families. It's also intuitively, how comfortable are we out in public? How sensitive are we about public? Okay? The last thing I want to cover with the Aries point, and also as a way to kind of get to grips of what it is the node. And the nodes are a karmatic feature. Now, if you don't believe in karma, that's fine. I respect that. But think of the South Node as the patterns that you keep repeating over and over and over again that you'd really like to break. And that the North Node is seen as an evolution, that once you break the South Node and you begin to focus toward the North Node, that you're evolving. But it's our connections, our times. It's how we make connections. So how we make connections, the moon to the node, I'm going to kind of go backwards here, would be, again, interactions with women, but it's also interactions on a domestic level or interactions of a intuitive, so there's a lot that is at play here with the node and the moon. Okay? As a matter of fact, I like to go back to the books. I'm just going to not do this for every one because I don't want to spend that much time on it. But I do love going back in here, and she does the moon and the node. It's probably one of the last. Yeah, it is. She talked about family history and how it's relevant to one's contacts or meetings with women, or whether people show their real feelings to others. I did talk about that, the emotional sensitivity, the vulnerability, and how much are you willing to put out of that? It's the residuals of the maternal, it's the residuals of your mother, and then using that in your interactions with the established connections, okay? It also refers to, you know, when you're doing Aries moon, these are the more intimate people. You're not going to be Aries moon to just anybody. So the other thing about when you start getting into the personal points, realize that the moon is much more closer to home. Whereas the midheaven is the furthest out, presenting all public. Okay? So that takes me through the Aries point of everything. Now let's look at the sun for everything. So we looked at the sun with the moon. We've looked at the sun with the Aries point. The sun and the north node, or the node, I should say, because it's not always a north node just. But say that we're doing the nodes. And by the way, I'm going to show you a computer printout of what Midpoints listing looks like from SolarFire. I didn't do Janice's. Unfortunately, I used SolarFire for this because I was doing it rather quickly. But I do want to point out that you can find midpoints in your astrology softwares. I'm teaching you the math because we don't always have software handy, and that's a really clever trick. You don't even have to look it up. So if we're doing this, we're talking about not only our male interactions, but here, let's look at Martha. So you're looking here at ego interactions, because I like to replace the sun with the ego. It is the I am placement. And the sun itself is who we are, okay? It's establishing your links that are, you're establishing links where you hope or you might get close to the person. The moon, you're always close to the person. But in the case of the sun, you're making connection where you're trying to identify with the destiny, the life path, and what is being mandated that you need to be, okay, and the connections that you need to have. So it's I like the way she says how much one gives themselves when with others. I think that's a really excellent sentence. Sums up everything. Okay? So we did the sun, the moon, the sun. I'm just making sure I've done them all. Sun, moon, sun, Aries point, sun, sun node now, and sun midheaven. Let's do sun midheaven. I think I might have touched on it briefly, though it's hard to say because I've done this video so many times. This one is really your professional ego. This is really huge, okay? Not as huge as Ascendant Midheaven, which I'll get to in just a minute. But to have the sun with the midheaven, I'm sorry, the Ascendant Midheaven is your calling, and I'll get to that in a minute. But let's look at this sun midheaven, okay? And it's this is where the father archetype comes in, and I did do a whole thing on this, and I don't know if it was this video, but this is the contact with those who are in authority, and it's the manner in which your career or your outside interests showcase your own personal self-development. So here we go with the ego again, and it's about the experiences that a person has that they're projecting for their future. So remember that the midheaven is also the future, and it's that expectations of the future, but it's the ego as related to the future, okay? Remember that if it's the node with the midheaven, that's like a work connection, that's a work meeting, a work thing. But if it's just the sun, it's more about the you in that midheaven place. The moon midheaven, okay, is the idea, and I have that here because I have my pages open now, is again public opinion or sentiment about your career. Okay, so that's what that is. But it's also about how sensitive you are, how much you need to feel like you have to prove yourself. It's about emotional stability and maturity in professional situations. That's per Martha Lang Westcott, page 107. Okay? So that covers then the midheaven. And then let's just look briefly at the ascendant. So we're looking at everything. So the ascendant is your outer layer, your environment, if you will. It's this room I'm sitting in, but it's also what I look like. So if I'm looking at the moon and I just did the midheaven, but if I'm looking, and I did the Aries point, and I also talked about the node, but I'm sorry, I don't want to do the moon. Let me, that's not what I want to do. I want to do the ascendant. We did the moon with the midheaven, which, I want to put this down, this is real important to me, is your calling. If you look at the midheaven with the ascendant, you're going to find a lot out about your calling, what it is you feel compelled to do based on who you are in terms of your environment, where you come from. And one of the things I want to point out about these, because I will share my own experience here, is that these midpoints can equal planets, okay? My sun-moon is really, really close to, my sun-moon midpoint is somewhat close to my Mars, but not as close as my ascendant midheaven is to Pluto. And that is exactly how you would write it, okay? So these midpoints are really become very, very instrumental in reading delineations, understanding people, because oftentimes they will equal asteroids or they will equal planets, and it tells you a lot about the information. And I'll give you an example. I mentioned how the sun-moon was kind of close to Mars. Well, I was a dancer, which is kind of athletic, and I've been a yogi, and I grew up with more males than females. So that did work, but it's about a degree off, so I don't always use that. However, my midheaven ascendant equals Pluto, and besides being an astrologer for 45 years where I really have counseled people all that time, even when I was dancing. But dancing in itself is also transformative. Astrology is transformative. Counseling people is transformational. So Pluto is real big with my calling. And that's one of the things that I really want to encourage people to do, is look at these midpoints and see if you can understand even more about yourself or about your clientele if you're a professional astrologer. Using midpoints, sometimes we forget about these things as astrologers. There's so many different techniques that we could use that we forget about some of these simpler techniques. And this is a really, really simple technique, as we've seen. So I want to show you something while I have the computer up, and I'm going to pull up my solar fire here and show you. I'm going to just use a transit chart, okay? And I know you can see that. And in this transit chart, because I don't want to use real people for this kind of class. I want this kind of lecture. I want to use fictitious people. Obviously, is what I've been doing the whole time. This chart here is interesting because it actually has almost an Aries point. When I pulled it up, I was really surprised because the midpoint, I'm going to do not the aspects. Here we go. Midpoint listing. Come on, girl. There we go. So there's four different ways of looking at midpoints. There's the mode. There's the trees. This is used a lot by Martha. This is one of her things. The axes, okay, and I like the listings. That's just my personal preference. But you can see everything. Now, what I really liked about this chart, and I kind of kept it, is this thing is less than a degree away from the Aries point, and I wanted to show that because I'm doing this video for the world at large. So my connection, my interaction, my relationship is with the world. So I thought that was really interesting. This gives you everything. And this is wonderful if you start working with the Uranian stuff. I left it at a 360 modulus, but you could also make it 90, okay, just as quickly. That's when working on the dial, a lot of times that works just fine. But see how this is all numbers, and it relates to numbers on the dial. If you go to the 360, now I've got my signs, my zodiac signs. My astrology is, I would say, more complete with this. One of the things I wanted to talk about by showing you this was I also wanted to show you the nodes. And the interesting thing, there's a node the north node and the south node in every chart has its own midpoint, which is well worth playing with, okay? But I also wanted to point out, remember we were just talking about the sun and the node and the moon and the node. I'd almost use the node midpoint there, but I am going to tell you that if you start looking at this moon, let's look at the moon midpoint because it'll be easier to find. Okay, here's south node and here's north node. And though they're each 26, 29, and on a dial they'd be in the same place, they are square and not opposite. And that's what happens when you start mixing energies. I threw the moon into the equation. And so the moon and the math of that is going to end up being a square, which is different than the actual opposition that it starts with. I did want to show that. I don't know why, except for I think that as an astrologer, I expected that to be opposite and then realized, oh my goodness, no, it can't be. It has to be a square. So it doesn't really change anything. It's just something I want you to be aware of. The same thing with the sun and the node, which should be, here it is. See how square they are, Taurus to Aquarius at 16 degrees. Just very interesting stuff. When you get into the math and you get into the details, I think you learn a lot just by doing that. But as you can see, every midpoint is listed in this software. I believe Janice would have the same thing. I didn't get to that. So I do want to put that out there that I've worked with Solar Fire for decades. So I just, boom, automatically go right to it. The Janice, I've just been learning in the last year, as you all know. So hopefully, let me come back to you now. So hopefully this video took, and everything will be okay. So I want to thank you all for sticking it out and being here. I really want to gather a astrology community. So I really want to stick with what I call the bare bones of astrology. I want to talk about all of the things that all the tools astrologers use. I want to encourage more people to use and play with astrology and learn more. If not to do it professionally, at least to do it for themselves. Because what you can learn about yourself is just mind-blowing and so enlightening and so helpful. So with that said, I want to encourage you to, as always, please subscribe and like, because that really helps the channel to grow. And we're getting close to crossing over my first goal. So it's very exciting for me. The second, especially doing this kind of channel. So, I'm not going to get thousands and thousands of people, because I really am concentrating on a certain niche, if you will. But thank you all for bearing with me, for allowing me into your life, for watching these videos. And if you do have any questions, please be aware that on the website, divinationcounselingservice.org, there is a chat box if you have questions. And you can always leave questions in the comments here on the YouTube channel. I will answer them as soon as I can. I try to answer everything anybody who comments, I try to answer. So thank you all for being here and for watching this video. And I want to leave you, as I always do, with only happy readings. And until we meet again, take care.